Imagine going on vacation with your parents to the boardwalk. You start wandering off and end up in the house of mirrors. Fun, right? Wrong. As you're looking at your reflection in these mirrors, you realize it's not you and it's a doppelganger. Fast forward years later and you're going on vacation with your spouse and children to the same boardwalk that you haven't stepped foot in since you were a child. You're remembering about your experience and how you saw your doppelganger. Later that night, you see a family of 4 standing in the driveway of your Airbnb, but the only thing is, they look exactly like your family. They break in, tie everyone up, they're all wearing red, and none of them can talk except for the one that looks like you. Your doppelganger explains to you that everyone has a doppelganger and they want to be the only one, which means you need to be gone. You manage to escape with your family and have plans to drive off to Mexico. As you're driving through towns, you notice that a lot of people have been unalived by their doppelgangers, and you know this because they're wearing red. You then get a flashback when you were a child in the House of Mirrors. Your doppelganger had strangled you, trapped you underground with the other doppelgangers, while your doppelganger was living your life this whole entire time.
A disturbing new video was released last night showing a group of white girls beating up and threatening to murder a pregnant, drunk black girl who has epilepsy. The video I have is too graphic to show on TikTok, but you can find the full video on my Instagram. The 3 white girls in the video are beating up the unresponsive black girl while talking and laughing about killing her and then discussing where they are going to hide her body. The internet has found these girls and identified them to be Riley Blackwell, Brooklyn Morense, and Daphne Ordaway. The victim is Audrey Mazurek, who has epilepsy and was pregnant in the video. Riley, Brooklyn, and Daphne purposefully got Audrey so drunk that she could not move, and then filmed themselves beating her up. Since that video was taken, Audrey has posted an update, and you guys can pause this video to read it up above. I really hope that justice is served and that this case is not overlooked. But what do you guys think of it?
Rachel Hudson was 19 years old when she killed her terminally ill mom and then texted a photo of her dead body to her dad. It was Thanksgiving in 2013, and the family had been going through some extremely difficult times. Rachel's mom, 58-year-old Susan Lee, was terminally ill and suffering from congestive heart failure, kidney failure, and diabetes, and Rachel had been her primary caretaker since she was 9 years old. On Thanksgiving night, Rachel got into an argument with her father and later recalled feeling suicidal and like nothing was ever going to get better. And when her dad left to go Black Friday shopping early the next morning, Rachel would make a decision that would change her family forever. Once her dad left, Rachel planned to end her own life, so she loaded a shotgun that she kept in her closet. According to Rachel, she then started worrying about her mom finding her body and thought that if she killed herself, she would be killing her mom anyway. And that's when Rachel went into her mom's bedroom and told her, quote, "I'm sorry, this is what has to happen," end quote. She then fatally shot her mom. Rachel texted her dad and told her what she'd done, but he didn't believe her, so she took a photo of her mom's dead body and then texted it to him. Rachel was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 18 years in prison. She was originally sentenced to 50 years, but at the trial it was argued that she suffered from an undiagnosed mental illness, which played a factor in the murder and ultimately lessened her sentence.
This is a question for anyone who wholeheartedly believes that JonBenét's parents were involved in her unaliving. I've posted so many videos on this case, including a whole series about what I think personally happened that a lot of people agreed with. And that theory does involve her parents being involved to some extent. But I got so many comments from people asking me if her parents were involved, why her father is fighting so hard for the DNA to be retested. And then there were so many people commenting back at those comments saying that if an arrest was made from that DNA, it would be a scapegoat because the entire thing is a conspiracy and a cover-up. So that got me thinking. For the people that are so 100% convinced that her family is involved somehow, what would it take for you to be I'm wrong? What evidence would need to come out for you to be oh yeah, that guy is 100% guilty and I was wrong about the parents 100%? What would you need to come out about the ransom note? What evidence would need to come out about the ransom note and other details for you to be oh, I've been wrong this whole time. That guy, separate guy, DNA guy, is guilty. I've been thinking about this so much myself. All the info coming out and all the videos being it's gonna be solved any minute now. They're testing the DNA. Those videos are never right, but what if it actually got solved from the DNA testing? What story would need to come out? What explanation would need to come out for me to be I've been wrong? And this makes 100% sense. This new story makes so much sense. Personally, I have no clue. So that's why I need your help, because the people that follow me and comment on my TikToks have such great, I don't want to say imaginations, but just the way you guys' like minds work, you guys have pieced together things I've never thought of. So I really need your opinion on this. What would need to come out for you to be like, an intruder was responsible? What explanation would you need? Also, I just made a new TikTok where I'm posting beauty, lifestyle, everything that's like not true crime related. So if you want to see like more about me, more about my life, more about my makeup, I'm gonna have it tagged below and it's on my account. You can definitely find it. Please go follow me.
It was the most brutal mass murder Austin, Texas had ever seen. So brutal, in fact, that the first time I recorded this, it got taken down. Please be warned, this is the terrifying case of the yogurt shop murders. It's the 6th of December 1991 in Austin, Texas. Our case begins with 4 teenage girls. Jennifer Harbison was 17. She was saving up for college. She was super smart and hardworking. Sarah Harbison was 2 years younger. She was her younger sister. She admired her older sister and was like her in so many ways. The girls were absolutely lovely. Eliza Thomas was 17. Now, she was described as bright, funny, and hardworking. The baby of the group was 13-year-old Amy Ayers. She loved riding horses and wanted to become a vet, but none of them would make it out of the yogurt shop alive. Now, Jennifer and Eliza actually worked at the yogurt shop. It was called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. On the night in question, Eliza and Amy had popped over. Now, I don't know whether they wanted to just hang out with them or whether they maybe were getting a lift home. At around 11:47 p.m, the fire brigade were called to a fire. But this was no ordinary fire. The yogurt shop was in flames, and as soon as the emergency services extinguished the fire, they found something absolutely horrific. All 4 girls were dead. They'd been tied up with their own clothes and stacked on top of each other in the back of the shop. 3 of them had been shot in the head execution style. Now, Amy had 2 gunshot wounds and evidence of SA. It was clear that this fire had been started intentionally to remove evidence. Now, police initially believed this to have been a robbery because the tills had been emptied. But who would systematically kill 4 young girls in such a callous, brutal way over a couple of $100s? It wasn't like this was a bank and this was massive amounts of money, and the murders just seemed too planned out. Forensic teams discovered shell casing and male DNA on the girls, which narrowed down the search, kind of, but not much. The last known customers had left the store at around 10 p.m. that night, and a couple actually reported seeing 2 men sat in the corner without yogurts in that yogurt shop at that time. They felt that the 2 men seemed to be kind of lingering in hindsight. Could this have been the murderers waiting to strike? As the days and weeks rolled on, police started interviewing hundreds of suspects. They eventually focused in on 4 teenage boys in the area. Now, this was Maurice Pierce, Robert Springsteen, Forrest Wellborn, and Michael Scott. Not to be confused with my spirit animal Michael Scott, aka It's Britney Bitch. After intensive interrogations, Robert and Michael actually gave confessions, but if any of you have ever watched Netflix's confession tapes, you will know that a lot of the time this is done under intense pressure and basically people are forced into this. There's so many cases where innocent people have given confessions. There was no physical evidence connecting them to the murders or the scene, and their stories conflicted with each other. It seemed police just kind of wanted to close this case. Robert and Michael were both originally convicted of the murders, but maintained that their confessions were coerced. DNA testing proved that unknown male DNA was present that didn't match any of these 4. Robert and Michael were released, but by that point they'd spent about 10 years behind bars for a crime they didn't commit. Chillingly, this case is unsolved. The real killer or killers have never been caught.
Imagine going on vacation with your parents to the boardwalk. You start wandering off and end up in the house of mirrors. Fun, right? Wrong. As you're looking at your reflection in these mirrors, you realize it's not you and it's a doppelganger. Fast forward years later and you're going on vacation with your spouse and children to the same boardwalk that you haven't stepped foot in since you were a child. You're remembering about your experience and how you saw your doppelganger. Later that night, you see a family of 4 standing in the driveway of your Airbnb, but the only thing is, they look exactly like your family. They break in, tie everyone up, they're all wearing red, and none of them can talk except for the one that looks like you. Your doppelganger explains to you that everyone has a doppelganger and they want to be the only one, which means you need to be gone. You manage to escape with your family and have plans to drive off to Mexico. As you're driving through towns, you notice that a lot of people have been unalived by their doppelgangers, and you know this because they're wearing red. You then get a flashback when you were a child in the House of Mirrors. Your doppelganger had strangled you, trapped you underground with the other doppelgangers while your doppelganger was living your life this whole entire time.
He didn't just stalk Björk, he filmed his descent into obsession for 22 hours, right up until the day he mailed her a bomb. Ricardo Lopez was a painfully isolated young man who struggled with his appearance, his confidence, and basically every aspect of himself. He dropped out of high school because he wanted to pursue art, but eventually ended up working for his brother's pest control business, and most of the time he was alone. Then he discovered Björk. Her music became an escape for him. He became fascinated with her personality, her music, her entire existence, and at first, it probably seemed harmless, but this wasn't a normal celebrity crush. Starting in 1993, Ricardo became completely consumed by Björk. He followed her career, obsessively documented her life, and started recording himself talking about her for hours. He even kept an 803-page diary detailing his thoughts and feelings. And on those tapes, you can literally hear the obsession getting worse. He talked about how much he loved Björk, how badly he wanted her, and eventually he started convincing himself that he would do anything to be with her. Then in 1996, Björk started dating Black British musician Goldie, and this is where everything took a horrifying turn. Ricardo became enraged because Björk was with a black guy. His videos became increasingly racist and hateful, and his fixation on Björk turned violent. He began believing if he couldn't have her in this life, then they needed to be together in the next. He even referred to himself as her angel of death, and then he started building a bomb. Ricardo created a letter bomb that was designed to spray sulfuric acid into the victim's face when it was opened. He hid the device in a hollowed out book and disguised the package as a special project from Björk's record label. Then, on September 12, 1996, he mailed it to Björk's home in London. And what makes this case even more disturbing is that Ricardo already knew what he was going to do afterward. He didn't want to get caught, and he didn't want to face time in prison. So after mailing the bomb, he went back to his apartment, turned on his camera, painted his face, played Björk's music, and committed suicide. His body wasn't discovered for 4 days. When police finally entered the apartment, they found the tapes. Those recordings revealed the bomb, the plan, and the horrifying extent of his obsession. Authorities immediately contacted his bomb squad, who traced the package to a London postal office and safely intercepted it before it reached Björk. Björk was understandably terrified. She eventually left London and relocated to Spain, while increasing security for herself and her son. This is exactly why stalking and obsession shouldn't be romanticized. The actions themselves are terrifying and can lead to tragedies just like this. Today's case was scary because this could happen to anyone, so to ease your nerves, I'm gonna give you a hug. Bring it in. With that being said, what do you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
The opening scene of this horror film was based on a terrifying murder case. If you've seen Jeepers Creepers, you will know this opening scene where the two siblings are driving down the road and a van is tailgating them. It's terrifying for these two who are trying to desperately swerve out of the way. But what's even more terrifying is that it's based off an episode of Unsolved Mysteries from '91. And spoiler alert, the mystery did get solved, and it's probably more horrific than anyone could have imagined. So the real life case in question involves Ray and Marie Thornton. Now these were siblings who were out just driving one day minding their own business outside Michigan. They suddenly noticed a very suspicious van. The van initially passed them and they noted that the driver seemed to be in a massive hurry. They later passed this van again, but this time at an abandoned schoolhouse. And as they looked at the driver who was now out of the van, he seemed to be holding a blood-soaked sheet. Well, they were really creeped out by this point, but they carried on driving and discussing what they should do. They then yet again noticed the van driver in the rearview mirror. He was driving aggressively close to them for the next 2 miles, exactly like that opening scene of Jeepers Creepers. Now the siblings were totally freaked out by this point and decided to turn off the highway to discuss what the hell they should do. It was definitely enough to really scare them, so they decided to turn the car back around and try and go and get the details of this van. However, when they approached the van again, they saw the driver was like crouched down, weirdly trying to almost like change the number plates. Why would he need to do that? They were also then terrified to see that on the inside of the van seemed to be blood. They decided to immediately call police because it was obviously very, very clear now that something was very wrong. This was extremely helpful for authorities because they were already on the case. They were desperately trying to track down the male van driver and his missing wife. Now, Dennis Depew was the man in question. In 1971, he'd married his wife Marilyn. He worked as a property assessor and she was a high school guidance counselor. Now, they had 3 children together, but they were absolutely far from a picture-perfect family. Now, Dennis was firstly absolutely terrifying. I can't imagine he was welcomed with open arms at the school gate every morning. But he was also very controlling and very abusive. Ultimately, it got too much for poor Marilyn, who decided to file for divorce. Dennis technically moved out in 1989, but this is far from the last that she would see of him. He would terrify this poor woman by coming into her house unannounced. He chillingly even one day was sat on her sofa after letting himself in, even though she changed the locks. On Easter Sunday 1990, Dennis arrived to collect 2 of their children for the day. However, a huge argument began between them. In view of the petrified children, Dennis began screaming at Marilyn and then callously shoved her down the stairs. He then savagely beat her and dragged her out of the house. Their eldest daughter was obviously horrified by this and she sprinted to the neighbour's house to ring the police. Sadly, it was too late. Dennis already sped off in the van with Marilyn, lying to the children saying that he was going to take her to a hospital. So back to the eyewitness reports then from the schoolhouse. The forensics team sealed off the abandoned schoolhouse crime scene and the hunt was on to find Marilyn. Deep down they were expecting the worst, the blood-soaked sheet, the blood on the inside of the van, and obviously Dennis's erratic behaviour. And sadly, the following day they found what they feared. Marilyn's body was discovered. She'd been killed by a gunshot to the head. So now the hunt was on to find the culprit, Dennis. And he was already speeding across the country at this point. Now, a few days later, he did send some rambling notes, some letters to family members, basically trying to justify killing his wife. But he didn't explain where he was going to go or what he was going to do, and the trail went cold for a year. That was until the 20th of March 1991, when a woman called Mary arrived home in Dallas, Texas. She arrived to see her boyfriend Hank's van on the drive, and when she entered the house, she noticed Hank was acting really weirdly. The TV was on in the background, playing an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. But Hank suddenly started rambling on about how ill his mother was, and he had to desperately drive and see his mum and would be back shortly. He quickly left the house and she would never see him again. Because Hank wasn't Hank. Hank was Dennis, the man whose face was staring out from the TV screen on the episode of Unsolved Mysteries, suspected of his wife's murder. He'd killed her and gone on the run and started a new life with this poor unsuspecting woman. Mary's friend was actually the one to call the hotline, reporting that Dennis was her friend's boyfriend Hank. She gave police the license plate number of Hank/Dennis's van, and a high-speed police chase ensued. When officers finally caught up to Derek, it was very clear he was not going to pull over himself, so they rammed his van and forced him off the road. Seconds later, Dennis pulled out a weapon, pulled the trigger, and unalived himself right then and there.
Defense attorney Kevin Reddington has won several high-profile cases during his lengthy career. I want to talk about one of those. This case is fully resolved. It dates back to 1989 in Massachusetts, and winning this case was an achievement that helped earn Kevin Reddington a place in the American College of Trial Lawyers. This trial is also the first successful use of what is called battered woman syndrome as a defense in Massachusetts history. The woman facing charges in this case was 33-year-old Therese Rogers. She was accused of murdering her boyfriend, a man called Walter Quinn, whom she lived with. And what Reddington argued in court was why it happened and what state of mind Therese Rogers was in when she did it. Therese Rogers was a 33-year-old woman from Bridgewater, Massachusetts. She had been in a relationship with a man called Walter E. Quinn Jr., a relationship that prosecutors and defense attorneys agreed was defined by years of severe physical and psychological torment directed at both Therese Rogers and her 9-year-old daughter. And there is limited information on this case because it did happen so long ago, but by certain wording of reports, I'm inclined to to think that the daughter was Teresa's from a previous relationship. But like I mentioned, Therese, her daughter, and Walter all lived together in a house that was around 25 miles south from Boston. And what the trial would eventually establish was that the dynamic and the environment inside of the house was a horrible one. Walter was a deeply violent man who hurt those closest to him. For years at the time of this case, there had been instances time and time again of Walter treating both Therese and her daughter horribly. He was angry, aggressive, destructive, and all of that he directed towards the only other two people who lived in the house with him. It started off slowly, but it got worse and worse over time until it got to the point in which every single day Therese felt like she had to walk on eggshells because the smallest thing would set him off, and when he got mad or annoyed or frustrated, there was no telling what he would do. And like most women who find themselves unfortunately in situations like that, Therese felt trapped and absolutely helpless. What Walter represented in that home to Therese and to her daughter felt like a constant escalating threat. And what Kevin Reddington would later argue in trial is that experiencing that level of mistreatment had done something very specific to Therese's psychology. By the way, Kevin Reddington was in his 30s at the time of this case. He's 75 years old now, so a long time ago. He argued that it had given Therese post-traumatic stress disorder, so PTSD, that it had rewired her threat response and put her into a state that psychologists called hypervigilance, a constant, exhausting readiness for the next attack. And Reddington would state that on the night of the killing, that hypervigilance had collided with something that Walter did or said that triggered in Therese a response that she genuinely believed was the only thing standing between her family and death. And again, the details of what exactly happened are very hard to find because remember, this was in 1988, so the internet didn't exist back then as a public resource, but what we do know is that on the night of the crime, Therese hit a breaking point. Walter was asleep when Therese grabbed a sharp weapon. She walked into the bedroom, approached Walter while he was sleeping, and using that, she plunged it directly into his eyes. His injuries were fatal. He did not make it, and Therese was then charged with first-degree murder. She didn't deny doing it. That was never the question. The only question was why. And the answer to that question was going to require the jury to understand something about the human mind under sustained threat that most of them had never been asked to consider before. Therese Rogers was arrested, charged, and facing the possibility of spending the rest of her life behind bars. She retained Kevin Reddington as her attorney, and Reddington began building a defense that had never been successfully argued in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The challenge was exactly that. It was a challenge, and it was a complicated one. Not because the facts of the case were unclear, but because Reddington was asking the jury to expand their understanding of what it means to act in self-defense and to consider the possibility that self-defense does not require the threat to be immediate and visible at the moment of the act. Also want to make it very clear, I'm not saying that what Therese did was excusable or justifiable or the right thing to do at all. Murder is murder, and it is fundamentally wrong. I just think that Reddington's use of this defense is so interesting to learn about. But anyway, the defense strategy that he used is what has been defined as battered woman syndrome. That, back in 1989, was something that a lot of jurors in that courtroom were hearing for the first time. Battered woman syndrome was first described and named by Dr. Lenore Walker in her 1979 book, The Battered Woman. Dr. Walker identified a specific psychological pattern in women who had experienced intimate partner violence. A pattern that explains both why women stay in toxic relationships and how the sustained trauma of what they go through affects their perception of threat and danger. The core of the syndrome rests on what Dr. Walker describes to be the cycle of violence, a repeating pattern of tension building up, an acute violent episode, making up and apologizing, and then a calm period of time before the tension begins building again, and then the cycle repeats. She explains that over time, the repeated exposure of this cycle produces in the victim a state of learned helplessness, a psychological condition in which the person becomes convinced that they cannot escape and they cannot predict the next time that an attack will come, creating this state of constant hypervigilance. That hypervigilance is key in what Reddington was arguing in Therese's case, because the argument there is that a person in this constant state of hypervigilance, conditioned by years of real sustained violence, does not process threat in the way that an untraumatized person would. In simpler terms, a person with trauma may perceive danger completely different than a person without trauma. A person with trauma may respond to a threat that is real to them in ways that would not make sense to someone who has not been in their position. And Dr. Walker stated that a victim experiencing battered woman syndrome may genuinely believe in the moment of their response to an attack that what they are doing is the only thing that will keep them alive. Kevin Reddington had graduated from Suffolk, I think that's how you pronounce it. I just looked up up how to pronounce it, and it's a difficult word for me. Suffolk University Law School in 1975. He passed the bar exam and was admitted to legal practice that same year. By 1989, he had been practicing criminal defense for 14 years, taking a lot of cases that most attorneys would avoid, building a reputation as someone who was not afraid of difficult facts or difficult clients. He is known to be extremely well at his job because he is, but apart from that, he's also a very strong presence. He's theatrical, he's intellectual. He's been described as affable, tough, hardworking, and dedicated to his clients. So, the trial of Therese Rogers started the year after the crime took place, and the prosecution's argument was what you would expect, that Therese murdered Walter Quinn on purpose with intent and with premeditation. They argued that when this happened, Walter was asleep, so he wasn't actively attacking anyone when she acted, saying that there was no immediate visible threat. They stated that Therese Rogers had made a deliberate, calculated decision to kill a man who was asleep and defenseless, that whatever her history was with Walter, she had options. She could have left, she could have called the police, she could have found another way. Reddington's argument, on the other hand, was that Therese Rogers was not a murderer, but a woman in the grip of a genuine psychological crisis, a crisis produced entirely by the man who was her victim. He called expert witnesses to explain battered woman syndrome to the jury in clinical terms, stating that what Therese was in was a form of temporary insanity, otherwise known as battered woman syndrome, leaving her delusional at the time of the crime. And he argued that because she was in a moment of psychosis or delusion when she acted, she should be found not guilty. And his argument was successful. In the end, the jury agreed that Therese Rogers murdered her boyfriend because she had become convinced that the past 9 years of horrible treatment was going to lead to either her or her daughter's death, or both. The jury agreed that because of the state of mind that Therese Rogers was in, she was convinced that Walter Quinn was capable of killing her at any moment, so she murdered him before he could murder her. Therese Rogers was acquitted in 1989, found not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. It was the first successful use of the battered woman syndrome defense in Massachusetts history, and again, it was the case that earned Reddington a spot in the American College of Trial Lawyers, something that is reserved for less than 1% of trial lawyers across the US, Canada, and Great Britain. Pretty wild. Today, Kevin Reddington is obviously representing Lindsay Clancy. He's 75 years old now, and he has more than 100 murder cases behind him. That said, I think it's pretty obvious that he is insanely good at what he does, but it is also worth noting that in the past, he has represented criminals responsible for doing very, very, very horrible things, but part of the job, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I was just doing some research, came across this case, and I thought I would tell you guys about it. That's all for me today. Let me know your thoughts, and thank you for spending time with me today. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
I just will never understand. If you're unhappy in your marriage, just get a divorce instead of conspiring with a number of different people to have your spouse murdered. So in October of '92 in Phoenix, Arizona, a woman named Carol Gold had called 911 saying that she had came home and found her husband on the kitchen floor. So when the police arrive, they find Chuck, or he goes by Black Bart. He was found all in black in a cowboy outfit, and he had 8 entrance wounds, 4 to his head, 3 in his chest, and 1 in his wrist. Now, they do believe that Chuck was ambushed because in the living room, they found a chair that had been moved, and behind it, they found a set of shoe prints. So someone was waiting for Chuck to arrive home. So a little background on Chuck. He's originally from the Chicago area, and growing up, he absolutely loved the West and cowboys, and he would ride horses as often as he could. He joined the Army, and then in 1961, when he got out of the Army, he married his first wife, and they had a daughter, Stephanie, together. But when his daughter Stephanie was 2 years old, they got divorced, and he would get married 4 more times. Now, eventually, because he loved the West so much, he was involved in these gunslinging shows and would do a lot of reenactments. And then Chuck ends up meeting Carol. So some background on Carol. She is one of the original Playboy bunnies, but she was also a Catholic school teacher. So she was living this double life. She has 2 children from a previous marriage, and eventually they moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where they opened a horse stable, and Chuck was still doing gunslinging shows. Now, there was no forced entry to the home because the back door was unlocked, and there was no signs of a robbery because everything was in its place. So someone had targeted to murder Chuck. So Carol claims that she has an alibi, that she was at the horse stable all day, had dinner with her daughter, then came home and found her husband. They ask about a life insurance. She says, "I'm not aware of any big life insurance policy." They ask if Chuck is having an affair. She said a few years prior, he did have multiple girlfriends, but he hasn't been cheating on her recently. But there was a former employee he did have problems with, and his name is James Long Jr., or he goes by Jimbo. So then they speak with Carol's 20-year-old son, Ashton. Now he is on probation for narcotics. He says that he has a good relationship with his stepfather, calls him dad because he's raised him since he was 4 years old. Now he says that Chuck does have a girlfriend on the side and her name is Jermaine, and she is in fact married. So now they really want to question this former employee and also Jermaine. So they question Jimbo, and he claims that Chuck accused him of stealing some firearms from him, which he did not do. But eventually him and Chuck made amends, and he does have an alibi for his murder. So now they're going to turn to Jermaine. So Jermaine does admit to having an affair with Chuck, but she claims that Chuck had told her that Carol no longer wants to be intimate with him. And the day before his murder, he had called her and he was complaining about her son Ashton because he was lazy, he wasn't picking up the slack or working or doing anything. So she told the investigators if they really want to get some more information, talk to his right-hand man named Richard. But she does have an alibi for his murder, so she was ruled out. So Chuck had told Richard that he was sick and tired of his stepson Ashton. He was paying for him to go to school, which he was not attending. He was smoking marijuana at the horse stables, and if he got caught, which is illegal at the time, he could have lost everything. He also has a criminal history. He also owed a dealer some money, which his name is Bob Pryor, and he had to bail him out of that. So Ashton is living with Carol and Chuck gave Carol an ultimatum. Either Ashton is going to get out of the house, or you both can leave and I will divorce you. So it turns out that there is $150,000 life insurance where Carol is the beneficiary. So Ashton was brought in again for questioning, and he does admit to using, while he's on probation, all the way up to his stepfather's murder. So they decide to do a search warrant on his dealer's home, and they do end up finding .22 caliber bullets, which were the ones that were used to murder Chuck, and they know that he has a .22 semi-automatic. So Dan, who is a police informant, tells investigators that he does know Bob Pryor and believes that he's involved in Chuck's murder. He gave him $50 to drive him around, and they drove right past Chuck's home. He said, "Let me out here, I'll page you when I want to be picked up." He picked him up, they went to a canal, and he possibly threw the murder weapon out. So they decided to arrest Bob, Ashton, and Carol for the murder of Chuck. But unfortunately, they did not have enough evidence to charge Carol, because this is all a circumstantial case. So they had to let her go and drop the charges. She was able to cash in on that life insurance, but she had to use it for her son's defense. So Bob and Ashton's trial starts in 1994. So the defense's argument was that Chuck was sick and dying, and he hired a hitman himself to help assist him in ending his own life. Well, there was one juror that possibly believed that story, so there was a mistrial. But while Bob was out on bond awaiting his second trial, he was arrested again for selling narcotics. So to get a lesser sentence, he decided to take a plea deal and testify against Carol and her son Ashton. Now, Ashton did not like his stepfather. He wanted him dead because he was cheating on his mom because she wasn't young anymore, and he was going to kick him out of the house. Now, according to Bob, he was not the one that pulled the trigger. In fact, it was Dan. But Dan has already been given immunity for testifying. But Bob and Dan are pointing the finger at each other on who actually pulled the trigger. But they decided to try Bob instead because Dan already has immunity. So they believe that he waited for Chuck to come home and they ambushed him. They believe they have enough evidence to charge Carol with first-degree murder and conspiracy. So her and her son Ashton are on trial in 1997. And halfway through the trial, Ashton decides to take a plea deal and was sentenced to 18 years. But Carol decides to take it all the way, but she was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy and was sentenced to 25 years to life, but she was released on parole in the year 2024 at the age of 84. So Ashton was released in the year 2011 at the age of 39, and then Bob was sentenced to 20 years, and he was released in 2007. I just will never understand why divorce is not an option. You are completely fine with conspiring with your own son and other people to have your spouse murdered. What do these people think after this is all done? That they're going to collect this life insurance and just go on with their lives like nothing had happened and they won't face the consequences of their actions? I will never understand it. But my heart goes out to Chuck. He did not deserve this. All Carol had to do was just divorce him if she wasn't happy. That's all you have to do. But unfortunately, everybody involved in this case, they're already released on parole, and it's just not fair. I don't believe Chuck got full justice. Carol should have spent the rest of her life behind bars. She was the mastermind behind this, and she should have been locked up for the rest of her life. But let me know what you guys thought of this in the comments. Thanks for watching. I love you all and all your support. We'll see you in the next one, and please take care of yourselves.
She begged her friends to stop beating her for 30 minutes straight, but they continued to do so anyways while filming the whole thing. On the evening of March 30th, 2008, a 16-year-old girl named Victoria Lindsay, who everyone called Tori, was hanging out at the beach when suddenly she had gotten a message from one of her friends telling her that she needed to come home immediately. Now, normally, home would have meant her parents' house, but just a week earlier, Tori had gotten into this huge argument with her mom, and things had gotten so bad that Tori had moved out and started staying with one of her friends, a 17-year-old girl named Mercedes Nichols, who lived with her grandmother in Highland City, Florida. Now, things between Tori and Mercedes had not exactly been perfect. They had been arguing because Tori had borrowed Mercedes' hairbrush and razor without asking. There was another disagreement over about $4 in gas money, and on top of all of those petty grudges, the girls had been sending each other really angry text messages and posting things back and forth on MySpace. But I mean, none of this was like life-threatening betrayal or something. It was just petty high school drama between two girls. So when Tori got the text saying that she needed to come home quickly, she probably thought that they were just gonna talk things out. But the moment that she got inside and into the bedroom, Mercedes suddenly appeared with 5 other girls who had apparently been waiting in different rooms. And the second they came out, all the girls surrounded Tori and started screaming at her. They were yelling about things that she had supposedly said, threatening her and demanding that she had to admit everything that they believed she'd done. And before Tori could even understand why all these girls are here surrounding her, one of the girls, April Cooper, stepped forward and punched her in the face. Tori immediately put her hands up and tried to protect her head, but then another girl named Brittany Hardcastle joined in and started punching her over and over again until she fell onto the bed. And within seconds, the rest of the girls joined them. Tori was being hit from different directions, and every time she tried to turn her body to protect herself from one person, somebody else came on the other side and started doing something else to her. And then sometime during all of this struggle, Brittany grabbed Tori and slammed her into the bedroom wall so hard that everything went black. Tori lost consciousness. When she finally woke back up, she was somehow sitting on the couch in the living room, and Tori had no idea how she had gotten there. Her head was pounding from being driven into a wall. Her vision was already starting to blur, and when she looked around, there were 6 teenage girls standing around the couch in this semi-circle, and all of them were just staring directly at her. Some were standing near the walls, others were right beside the couch, and someone was standing in front of the doorway so that Tori couldn't run away. And a few feet in front of her, one of the girls was holding a camera and pointing it directly at her. Tori had barely opened her eyes when one of the girls stepped forward and started hitting her again. Then that girl moved out of the way and another one came in, and that's when they started taking turns. One girl would walk over toward Tori, punch her several times, and then move back so that somebody else could move forward and do the same exact thing to her. Tori pushed herself farther into the corner of the couch, brought both her arms up over her head, and just tried to make herself feel as small as possible. She was crying, she was screaming for them to stop. Blood was running down her entire face, but they just kept on coming. Even after their own knuckles were covered in Tori's blood, they continued hitting her. They screamed at her to fight back. They taunted her and told them to hit them back, but every time Tori tried to stand up from the couch, one of the girls shoved her back down and started punching her again. At one point, Brittany stopped and looked down at her own hands just to see that her knuckles were bleeding from how many times she had just hit Tori. But instead of seeing that blood and realizing, whoa, this has gone way too far, Brittany looked down at Tori, who was shaking and just breathing uncontrollably, and said, You think your lip is busted? Wait till I bust your nose too. Then she raised her fist and started hitting Tori again and again and again, just repeatedly. At some point during the attack, one of the boys who was in front of the house on lookout warned the girls that they were being way too loud and that the neighbors might hear them. And you would think that hearing that kind of warning would make at least one person inside of that room finally stop and realize what they were doing. But Mercedes, while sitting very comfortably on the couch watching her friend getting beaten, looked at the girls and said, "You don't have to stop beating her. Just quiet down." And like little puppets, the girls did as instructed. They lowered their voices and continued. For roughly 30 to 35 minutes, Tori remained trapped inside of that room while the girls punched her in the head, the face, and across the rest of her body. And every time Tori finally thought it was ending, another girl moved toward her and continued attacking. Blood was pouring out of Tori's nose and mouth. One of her eyes had started turning black and purple. The left side of her face started swelling. Her vision was becoming blurry, and because Tori had already been knocked unconscious once, she could barely keep track of what was going on around her. But there was one thought that she just couldn't let go of, something that was stuck in her head. They are going to kill me. Eventually, after more than half an hour, the beatings finally started slowing down. But it wasn't because they cared or anything. No. It was because Mercedes' grandma was about to be done with work, but they still weren't gonna let Tori just walk outside the house. Instead, Mercedes, Brittany Mays, and Brittany Hardcastle forced her into a car and drove away from the neighborhood. And as Tori sat there, bruised, bleeding, and barely even able to think straight, she had no idea where they were taking her, or if something even worse was about to happen. But eventually, Tori looked out of the window and realized the car had pulled into the parking lot of a CVS. And before pushing her out of the car, the girls warned her that if she were to ever go to the police and tell anybody what happened, they would find her and give her an even worse beating than the one that she had just survived. Then one of the girls called another teenager named Kelly and told her to go to the CVS and pick Tori up. But before hanging up, she gave Kelly one strange warning. Don't let her lie to you. She didn't get jumped. Kelly had no idea what she meant until she turned onto that parking lot and saw Tori. She was standing there shaking uncontrollably and crying, and her body was just filled with all of these bruises. She looked helpless. So Kelly hurried toward her, helped her into the car, and started looking over her injuries, assessing if she needed to go to the hospital or something. Like there was just no way in hell that she was gonna believe Tori had not gotten jumped, or at least been in a horrible attack. There was a huge knot near her left eye, which had already turned black and purple. Blood was covering her mouth and her face. One of her teeth was broken, and Tori looked so dazed that she could barely even speak. Kelly drove her back to her house, and as soon as the adults there saw the condition that Tori was in, they immediately called 911. And at some point, paramedics arrived and rushed Tori to the hospital. And once doctors began examining her, they realized that her injuries were much worse than they had looked from the outside. Tori had suffered a concussion from all the blows to her head. Her left eye had been injured so badly that her vision was affected. Her left ear had also been badly damaged, causing problems with her hearing, and the bruising that was all over her body was so severe that doctors had to admit her into intensive care. While Tori was lying inside the hospital trying to recover, police had already gotten their hands on the video that the girls had filmed inside the house. And once detectives watched the video, they were disgusted. The footage showed Tori curled up on the couch while different girls stepped forward and hit her one after another. It showed her trying to protect her head, and it showed that this had not been some quick fight that ended after a few punches. Polk County Sheriff Grady Judge described what happened inside of that house almost like an animalistic attack. He said that the teenagers showed almost no remorse when they were first questioned, so he pushed for all 8 of them to be charged as adults. 6 girls were arrested along with the 2 boys accused of acting as lookouts. The sheriff's office eventually released 3 minutes of the beating video, and almost instantly it was everywhere. News stations played it on the television, people reposted it online, and at one point 6 of the 20 most watched videos on YouTube were connected to Tori's attack. Which, if you really think about it, that's honestly like one of the darkest parts. These girls filmed themselves beating Tori up because they wanted the video to go viral, and even after they were arrested, it became exactly the spectacle that they wanted. At the end of the day though, everybody who saw Tori curled up on that couch had the exact same reaction: please lock them up. But out of the 8 teenagers that were originally arrested, only one of them had spent time in jail. Brittany Hardcastle, the girl who repeatedly punched Tori and slammed her head into the wall hard enough to knock her unconscious. She pleaded guilty to battery and false imprisonment, and she was sentenced to 15 days in jail. 15 days. That is disgusting, to say the least. The other girls mostly received probation and community service, while the charges against the two boys were eventually dropped because there wasn't enough evidence to prove that they had taken any part in the attack. I'm sure that it's not the justice that her family would have wanted, but I truly hope that Tori today is doing well. And if she ever sees this, just know that your story has truly saved so many boys and girls from entering a situation that could have cost them their lives. That is all that I have for today. I love you guys. Mwah. Please be safe out there. Group hug.
This woman was murdered only moments after her killer took these photos of her. This case is just terrifying. Hi, I'm Meg. I talk about true crime. Let's get into this case. Regina Walters was born May 5th, 1975 in Texas. She was a young girl with her whole life ahead of her. At the age of 14, she started a relationship with an 18-year-old boy. His name was Ricky Jones. Ricky did not have the best childhood. He basically grew up in the care of Child Protective Services. According to their friends, they seemed genuinely really in love. And in February of 1990, they wanted to run away together, start a new life in Mexico, but Regina was only 14. There was no way her parents were just gonna let her run away to Mexico, and so she didn't tell them. She just left. In fact, Regina and her mother had actually gotten into an argument before Regina ran away, so her mother just thought, oh, she's just angry. This wasn't the first time Regina had run away either. She had done it before, but usually she would call or come back. But this time, she didn't call. She never returned home. So her mother eventually filed a missing persons report. Like most of these older cases start, the couple had decided to hitchhike their way to Mexico. If you learn anything from these cases I cover, don't hitchhike. A seemingly friendly truck driver stopped and offered them a ride. But this truck driver was not the friendly man he was pretending to be. In fact, he had only recently just killed another couple. Little did Regina and Ricky know, they just got into the truck of the truck stop killer. Ricky was killed soon after they entered his vehicle. He was shot, presumably in front of Regina. The killer wanted Ricky out of the way. Sadly, his remains would not be identified until 2008. This was 1990. The last weeks of Regina's life were hell. Now, you're probably wondering, who was this truck driver? His name was Robert Ben Rhodes. And at the time of this specific murder, he was in his mid-40s. He was a truly twisted man. Robert had built a torture chamber in his truck. It was very similar to the toy box killer. I have a video on that as well. Regina spent up to a month in this torture chamber he had created. She was handcuffed to the ceiling and she went through unimaginable things. She was SA'd and abused every single day. I'm not going to go too in depth about what he did because it's just disturbing. But one of the things he did is he put fish hooks into her. He actually documented a lot of what went on back there with photographs. The police would eventually find these photos of Regina in the back of his van. And the reason they know she was in there for around a month is because he actually shaved her hair. And so it would be longer in the different photos. Therefore, they were able to estimate the length of time she was in there. I've seen things like, oh, she shouldn't have run away. She should have listened to her parents or whatever. This is a 14-year-old girl we're talking about. 14. No human, no matter what decisions they make in life, should have to go through what she went through. Disgustingly, Robert actually started calling Regina's parents, saying I've made some changes, I've cut her hair. Awful. Eventually, Robert took Regina to this abandoned barn where these photographs were taken. As you can see, oh, it's just disturbing. He dressed her in those heels in that dress, probably to make her look older. You can also see how short her hair is because he shaved it all off compared to how it was before she went missing. These photos have really stayed with me because she just looks terrified. It also kind of leaves me wondering why these photos were shared with the public in the first place. Robert killed Regina using a wire around her neck. It was really like an overkill. Luckily, in April of 1990, Robert's car was parked on the side of the road and a police officer wanted to check it out. Had nothing to do with Regina's case at all. But when the officer entered the truck, he found a young woman inside of the torture chamber. Robert was also armed with a gun and eventually arrested. Little did that police officer know he had just arrested a serial killer. With all of the evidence police found in Robert's vehicle, he was successfully linked to 3 murders, but believed to have committed 50 between the years of 1975 and 1990. 50! The landlady from the property he was renting actually found a bunch of photographs in his place, which helped link him to all of these murders. It was said that when his trial happened, people in the courtroom, sensed his evil. They kind of got a shiver when he walked into the room. Robert is still alive today, and he's 77 years old, I believe. Robert did get life in prison, and he was eventually nicknamed, as I said before, the truck stop killer. I really hope that Regina's family was able to eventually get closure of sorts, especially if they argued before she left. I can't imagine the feeling that would leave you with. It's really chilling to think that all of those cars were passing his truck on the highway and they had no idea what was going on inside. They just thought he was one of the truckers. But yeah, that is the case of Regina Walters. I know a lot of you were wondering what this case was about because the photo was circulating on TikTok. Please be aware of your surroundings everywhere you go and don't hitchhike, okay? Just don't do it. Take an Uber. Ask a friend to drive you. If you're not already, make sure you follow me on Instagram. You could just click this button in my bio. I post updates and stuff on my stories. I sometimes answer questions, so make sure you follow. The true crime cases are finally back every Sunday at around 4 p.m. UK time. This one, you're getting a little bit early because it's been a while since I posted. I would love to hear what you guys thought about this case in the comment section and what case you want to see next. That's all for today. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!